Okay, so I just would like to introduce our presenter for this afternoon. Margaret Hurley is an ESL instructor in Toronto, Canada. She is the Trinity CertTESOL teacher, trainer at Coventry House International and Ontesol. She is co-author of You Can Teach Grammar. So we have her contact information here if you want to check out her website or her Facebook page, the You Can Teach Grammar Facebook page. You can click these links here. Both are clickable, so you can click on them and you can check them out later. Okay, so I will now hand over the presenter rights to Margaret. And
all right, so thank you. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for the introduction, Ara. And I'd like to acknowledge, I see now in the room is my colleague, Jimena de Lazar Pintarek, and she will be keeping an eye on the chat box for us. So if you throw questions in there, probably, because my multitasking is not so great, Jimena can handle some of those, and she'll let me know if there's anything that's not working particularly well. So in the meantime, I'll just carry on. The background of both Jimena and I is that we know this grammar panic problem from both sides. We teach ESL, both of us in the classroom, and we are also teacher trainers. And so we see a lot of the panic that comes from people just learning, a little bit afraid about going into the classroom and not so sure about their grammar capabilities. So we understand the panic from both sides. What we will do in this presentation is first talk a bit about this problem of the panic, about where it comes from, and then we'll focus on one area because 1 hour is not enough to cover all the grammar of English, but we'll focus on one particular area. And today we're going to look at future perfect as an example, and we'll look at basically the ways to handle the panic, which are, first of all, just know the rules. If you know the rules, that will take you a long way. And we will end with a good chunk of some teaching ideas for these particular tenses. And those things will really help gain confidence in the classroom for dealing with these things. So to start, here's the problem. The problem is we give bad answers in the classroom. If you look over under the list of the usernames, you see a little hand icon. Could I ask people to just raise their hands if they have ever fallen back on one of these responses to students in the classroom for a grammar problem? Yes. A lot of hands. So we all know this problem. Put your hands down now. It is a pretty universal situation. And one little note about the because it sounds better excuse. We don't use it because it sounds better. It sounds better because we use it. Why does this happen? We don't want to give these. These are very much a universal problem, but why does this happen? It's terrible, unsatisfying answers for students. Well, the most likely reasons that we have for giving bad answers are basically one of three things. One is that we just don't have, as teachers, sufficient background in the grammar. And this is particularly true of native speakers. Native speakers can recognize whether it's right or wrong, but we don't know the rules. The kind of the inverse is true among non-native speakers. They know the rules, but lack confidence in giving out those rules or aren't always sure whether it's exactly the right rule that's being applied here. And in any case, the reason for this lack of confidence or lack of background, there's an inability to give students a response in a way that makes sense to them and in a way that they can retain. As TESOL trainers, we know that there's another big reason, and that is that the training is often insufficient. TESOL training programs, it depends on the type. There are many types. There are, very long ones that go over a year or 2 years. There are a lot of shorter ones, which I think probably most people end up doing. So many of these programs don't give much attention to the grammar portion. One reason is some of the programs assume or require that the trainees have enough knowledge before they even go into the program. But even if it seems that way, it's not always the case. In the training, grammar and methodology are often detached from each other. Or in the program, grammar is covered, but in a superficial way, because it's a deep, deep subject. Trainees are often resistant to getting deep into grammar. Some of it is fear, but there are other reasons. Among them, I'm not going to need it. I'm not teaching grammar. I'm teaching something else. Or I have pretty good grammar myself. I can handle the errors. I don't need to go so deeply. Or there simply isn't enough time and the methodology and teaching approaches are more important. Or it's just enough to know what's right and wrong. And these beliefs carry on for a long time. We teach a lot of experienced teachers as well. And sometimes these beliefs hold true for a period of time until some point, at some time, there's panic in the classroom because students do have questions which we can't answer. And that's when we give the bad answers. And it can be a truly humiliating moment, particularly for some of the more complex questions where students may have better knowledge than we have in the classroom. So the answer, really, the simple answer, like many things in life, is there's not a silver bullet. Really, the thing is, go back to the basics. If you cover the basics, follow the basic rules, you will probably get through most of it. So the next section of the presentation, I want to focus on the basic rules. And we're going to be looking at future tense. So I want to start off with a quiz. I'm getting notes that the audio is scratchy. I'll try to keep still. It might just be loose connection. So in the quiz, the first question in this quiz is, what are the future tenses? If you could put, just quickly list in the chat box the tenses, what are they? I like that English does not have future tenses, yes. And while technically that's true, that's not what we tell our students. So I agree, but theoretically there are none. But for classroom purposes, there are some. In another session of deep grammar geek terminology, then I'm there with you. But for purposes of this, we have, yes, and I see them, fantastic. Future simple, future progressive, future perfect, and future perfect progressive. And we also have our other friend, which is a sort of variant, going to future. So these are the future tenses. In this presentation, we're going to really zoom in on just those. Very good, Pamela, got all of them. Those last two, future perfect and future perfect progressive, or future perfect continuous. And what are the forms of these? Remember, I just go back to basics, make sure the basics are covered. The form of future perfect is what? In the chat box, can somebody, the form of future perfect, what does it look like? It looks like, yes, wonderful, Tyson. Full marks for Mr. Seaburn. No, will have plus past participle. Been is already a past participle. Half marks for Tyson. It's will have plus past participle. Will have been is one. Will have been is one example because been is the past participle. So the form for future perfect: will plus have plus the main verb in the past participle form. Right, Pema, I will have worked is an example. Will have, very good, Sonia. So future perfect continuous. I know you're. I get it. So future perfect continuous. The form is what? Will have been working. That's the example. So the form is right. Will have been plus. There you go. So these are all of them, and we're going to focus just on these last two. Hooray! Yes. So we're going to focus on just those last two in this presentation. And for a couple of reasons. There are a lot of resources available for the future simple, going to future, and future continuous, you know, the kind of resources you can grab in a panic if you need to cover those. The other reason is they're not so commonly used. It's another reason that there are not so many resources available. And so it's hard to find stuff and sometimes even to imagine stuff. So the other thing is these forms probably don't get covered very much until a fairly advanced level. And the structure really continues on from forms that students already know. They already know present perfect. So future perfect is just will plus present perfect, and so on. So it's relatively easy for students to put the forms together. So really the big thing is applying it. So now getting back to basics, remember that the solution to the panic is to know the basics. We have the form. Now let's look at the uses of these tenses. First of all, future perfect. The rules for future perfect. Really? Compared to some of the others like present simple and all of the others, those have so many uses. But put in its most basic form, future perfect has one use. Something that will be finished before a known time in the future. That's it. So there's your basic rule and your basic usage. You know the form, and then this is how you use it. Something that will be finished before a known time in the future. We have here two different depictions, and I know people have some other very clever ones. You know, it depends on your students and whether they're getting it or not, the depiction that's going to help them. The one on the right, the timeline, is by far the most common. Most of us use it. People relate to it fairly well. You have a depiction on a timeline of past, present, and future. And the key here for future perfect is that you have two future points. You have a known time in the future. In this example of Jack will have walked his dog before he goes to the office. One known future point in time is when he goes to the office. And the other future point is the action of walking the dog, and it will be finished before that future time. So it's depicted on a timeline in that manner. One action completed before the other known time. The depiction on the left is a variation for people who are not getting it with the timeline, and this is the protagonist, our little stick man. The X in his mind represents the action, a single action completed at a point in time, and it is related in some fashion to some future point in time. This can resonate with some users, some not. Another one, which we don't have depicted here, is one about the viewpoint. You can have someone looking from the future at points in the past. That works for some people. But this is the rule, and here are some depictions for this. The thing to remember for this tense is that it requires two future points. One point is the completion of the action, and the other point is a point in time beyond that. Now, this next piece will get kind of, it's heavy with text, but it's something to use to help students understand when and how to use a form, and that is a list of concept questions. Now, here it is. It's heavy. Breathe deep. I'll take you through it. But Jimena and I, along with a colleague, Claudia Bertotto, have written a book on grammar in the classroom, and we designed a kind of a decision tree for all of the tenses, starting with the most basic questions, all yes-no questions, really binary decision tree, yes, no, yes, no. If this one is yes, then go to this next question. If this one is no, go to this next question. So these concept questions represent one branch of that full decision tree. But these are concept questions that can be used to help you and students decide whether future perfect is the appropriate tense for a given situation. So you start with the most basic question: is the action finished? Yes or no? In this case, if the answer is no, then the next question is it a regular or habitual action? If the answer to that is no, then the next question. Now, if the answer to either of these is yes, then you have another branch of questions, which we're not showing here, but it's not going to be future perfect. So future perfect requires these particular answers to these questions. Is it related to another time? The answer to that is yes, and then the next question is it related to a time in the past? No. And so the next one, is it related to another event or known time in the future? So for future perfect, it's related to a known time in the future, whether it's a definite 5 o'clock kind of future time, or it's linked to another event with probably a prepositional phrase like by the time I get home. Or before he goes to the office, that kind of thing. The next question is whether it will be finished at that known future time. Will it finish either before or at the same time as another action in the future? In this case, yes, it will finish before. And then the final question, will it still be happening? And the answer is no, it will be finished. So you can anticipate that the other tense, future perfect continuous, the answer to that final question will be yes. So this may be helpful for really driving down when students are really trying to decide, particularly if they're writing something and they don't know whether to use one or the other. Having a fallback set of questions can be another useful basic. So we've got, for future perfect, we've got rules, we've got the form, the uses, some concept questions. And now we hope you're feeling a little bit more comfortable, but I'm going to throw you something a little bit tricky, another little quiz. And the question here is, with this example sentence, is this future perfect? The sample sentence, well, I guess you will have figured out the answer by now. Is that future perfect? What do you think? Very good. No, it is not. Looks like it. So the form matches, but its time reference is now, not a future time. And remember, go back to your basic rules. The time reference has to be in the future. So it has the same look, but will is kind of tricky, because will can be strictly for future, but will has other functions. It's a modal verb. And the modality, to answer Tyson's question, what is it? It's the modal, one of the possible modal uses of will, in this case, deduction, really. the modality of a kind of a certainty or deduction followed by a present perfect usage. So again, even tricky ones, if you go back to your basic rules, usually you can figure out. So good work, everyone. When in doubt, don't panic, go back to the basic rules. So our other tense today, I'll have a pass through that as well and go into the rules for future perfect continuous. This one is a little bit different because it describes an ongoing action. And the ongoing action, it can continue past that known point in the future. One thing that's the same, there is a known future point. But it's an action that started before then and either finishes at the same time or continues past that time. So it describes an action that will be ongoing at a known time in the future, and the action probably finishes at that known time. If it doesn't finish then, probably we don't care about what happens after that future point in time. So it either finishes or our interest in it finishes. This tense, the main use is something that highlights the duration. So you will almost always in these forms find some kind of reference to the duration of that action. Probably a prepositional phrase like for 5 years or something like that. In this example sentence, Jack will have been walking his dog for an hour by the time you arrive. So these sentences do get heavy with prepositional phrases of time because we need those references. In this case, the future point in time by the time you arrive and the duration for an hour, both of them. Another point here, as with all the continuous forms, all the progressive forms, with some kind of exceptions, but basically you can't use them with state verbs, with stative verbs, like be or become or something like that. Generally, there are meanings that can be adjusted for this kind of use, but as a general rule with students, we wouldn't be using this form with stative verbs. So we have another case of basically one use with a little bit more depth and specificity on how it's used. So let's look at the concept questions for this particular tense. You see they are very similar. Is it finished? No. Is it regular? No. Is it related to another time? Yes. Is it related to the past? No. Is it related to another event or known time in the future? So same as the other, related to a known time in the future, either a definite time or an event that we also know will happen in the future. Will it finish before or at the same time as that other action? Yes. Will it still be happening? Yes. And that's really the big difference. So we have the rules, concept questions, and forms for these two tenses. Just to complete the presentation of the basics for these two tenses, we have a depiction of all the possible forms, and I won't go through them all in detail. It's really a reminder that just the affirmative statements are not the only ways in which the tenses can be used. So remember also, because this modal will is in there, the use, especially spoken, will almost always have a contracted form. With will, apostrophe LL is far more common in spoken English than the full form. And remembering also that the negative form is more commonly won't than it is will not in spoken English. Is my audio okay? I just got a message. We okay? Okay, thank you. So you see some examples. Timothy will have completed his studies by June next year. So you're going to see a lot of that in those structures. I'll have forgotten all this by the time I take the exam. So you see a lot of by. and so on. The interrogative forms are also useful to review. Will you have received more stock of this new game before tomorrow? So another prepositional phrase defining the future time. And negative interrogative forms. Another example of possible forms for the future perfect continuous, affirmative, negative, the question form and the negative question forms. You see some examples there. Tammy will have been teaching at our school for 2 years by the end of next month. Now, it's not necessary always, like the next example sentence, she'll have been teaching for 2 years. In that case, the future point of comparison has to be understood. Otherwise, this form would not be the correct choice. So you will not have been working long enough. There's the duration reference there, long enough, to qualify for a pension next year. You won't have been working, you'll not have been working long enough. All are variations in the same form. How long will Zoe have been studying? And will they not have been selling those things beyond their expiration date? So a full picture of that. Now, what I want to do with the rest of this, which is probably the main reason a lot of you are here, is some ideas. All right. The question, will you receive more stock by tomorrow? Will you have received more stock by tomorrow? How can we explain the difference? Good question. The only difference is understanding the point in time. With the perfect, we don't understand there's not a precision on the time. It's just, it's going to be finished before then. Yeah. And there's the future. Well, no, they both have a future time reference, but it's the completion. Understanding when the completion happened. Right. One is going to be, will you receive it? It's going to happen. And will it be completed by tomorrow? So will you have received it? Maybe it's already happened. Will you receive it? It means it hasn't happened yet. So, sorry, I lost my track again. I want to move into classroom ideas. And the big challenge for students is probably not so much the form and the rules. It's probably an advanced level and they can figure it out relatively easily. So the tough thing is applying the forms. And so even like exactly Laurie's question, applying it and really feeling the context that it's an appropriate one. So what we will present from here are some classroom ideas, and it's all about giving students a context that makes sense. And these are 5 different contexts, and for a couple of them we have variations on the ideas. So we are hoping that some of these might prove useful for you in the classroom. The first is, so these are the 5 New Year's resolutions as a context. The world in 2025, business planning, deciding the end of the story, and then just making predictions in the class among the people that you have there. So starting with the New Year's resolution idea, this lesson plan format, these are kind of mini lesson plans here. The format here, although at advanced levels, we don't use the presentation practice production style so much, but we have one of these. This little plan is a PPP format. And so before the presentation stage, maybe a warm up to get students into the idea of New Year's resolutions. It's not commonly part of the New Year's celebration everywhere. So at some point, this is a way to ensure that in a discussion of New Year's traditions, that the idea of making a resolution for the year is part of the New Year tradition in some places. So then, the presentation stage, this is where students are going to get exposed to this language in its context. Give students a list of New Year's resolutions, and they can be from any source. They can be ones for you or someone that you make up, or it may be related to something you've done in the class. But point to the different resolutions and explain how by next year the person you're referring to will have accomplished this by this time, and then feel like it's a successful year. So having given them this language, then pull out of them the structure that they're looking at. And by this point, they almost certainly have been exposed to the present perfect form and the future simple form, so it should be pretty straightforward. Then for the practice stage, get them to actually convert the forms with a variety of possibilities, so they can fill in the blanks with the correct form. They get the base form of the verb with an example using future perfect by 2016. So that always that future anchor point. This is always part of the context. By 2016, he will have learned how to cook. And then finally, for the production stage, students can write their own list of resolutions and display them around the classroom or share them with each other or something like that. But they're using it in that context very clearly. So there is idea number one, using the context of New Year's resolutions. Pretty straightforward, pretty clear. And that time anchor by 2016. Okay, so our second context is looking at the future of the world. This one, we have a variation on it. This one is done in the task-based style, TBL format. So for a lesson using this context, a suggestion is, I love this one. I know Jimena has done this one, I know. Back to the Future Part 2, this movie. A great way to warm up. In that movie made in 1989, there were predictions made about the world in 2015. How timely. So there are parts of the movie that do this. So it will amuse people very much. And then so they can look at these predictions made then and get the idea of predictions, how many of them came true and how many of them did not. So they're into this idea of predictions quite firmly. Then in hoverboards, yeah, they didn't come true. And then as the main task, get students to work together and choose some area, maybe transportation, Tyson, hoverboards. Ask them to pick some area of design, homework, entertainment, clothing, transportation, whatever, and get them to figure out futuristic elements and describe them using by the year 2025, that future point in time anchor, and get them to produce that. And after they've gone through this task, it'd be a lot of fun, real imaginative stuff. Then you can focus on the mechanics of the language, guide students to focus on that structure, and reinforce it by getting them to make some more predictions about the future of the world in this case. I know one of the attendees, I think she's also a presenter, had talked about business context. So here's another variation on the world in 2025, but perhaps for a class of maybe people in the workplace or people in a more academic environment. An alternate approach, still in the task-based learning style, but instead of the movie, you may look at many. If you just Google the world in 2025, you will find so many resources, white papers, and a lot of videos. So you can add a significant, extensive listening element as well. But predictions about the world in 2025. Science Watch, The Economist, International Business Times, these will come up right at the top of a search. You can find a lot of resources. But here, this one variation to try to guide into the progressive use, the continuous use, is to get students to determine whether there are signs that any of these changes are actually underway already or maybe almost underway, because then you can get that for a period of time. By 2025, it will have been happening for some period of time. So get them to look at predictions and see, are they already happening, like the hoverboard. So get them to focus on some subset of the predictions and determine that. So this is where you can get the duration, when the predicted change will begin, or maybe it has already begun in the task phase. You know, is it happening? Is it going to happen? So they can use their predictive, especially if they're in that area of study. So in an academic or business environment, this can be a good variation. Then on the language focus, you can get into both the future perfect and future perfect continuous. Use those predictions and guide them to the structure and get them to make more predictions and definitely emphasize the duration. So, for example, by 2025, governments will have been relying on biometric identification for at least 5 years, according to me. So those are variations in just making general world predictions. Keeping into the idea now on maybe business-oriented students, a variety. This first one doesn't really need a deep business orientation. It could be used in a very generic class. These two examples are using the format, and that's not PPP, it's not a test-based learning. This one is the Engage, Study, Activate style of lesson, ESA. So in the Engage points, business planning. Engage, present company logos and company names, and just get the students to think about different companies and what they produce or the services they provide and so on. So get them thinking along those lines and list some products or services that they might produce. Then get them to activate that engagement by, again, predicting, getting that future anchor established, what one or more of these companies will do or will have achieved by the end of the year. So what is it looking like this year? So if it's a company or a product that they're interested in, they'll have perhaps some prediction. Or they can look at what's been done in the past. So they can present their predictions about the company 1 year, 2 year futures in the class. Then with those predictions, you can focus on the language that they use, get that future perfect form established, and get them to practice, use it in this established context with another activate sort of task, get them to vote on the predictions they believe are more probable, or expand on it, make it a longer term prediction or something along those lines. Now, something that is a little more specific to people who are actually engaged in making and executing business plans in their work life. Similar structure, it's Engage, Study, Activate style. But in this case, it's not generally what a company does, but more specifically a business plan. So get students to talk about the idea of business plans, their experience with doing business planning, or either creating the plans or having to make them happen. And probably the most effective will be to get them to focus on particularly the planning for the people resources, the time that people spend doing things, labor resources in a business plan. Then you can use a business plan, either a real life one for students who actually are working with business plans, or a purpose-built one that you create for the lesson. And these business plans will have, for a project, especially a project or a business unit, they will have some plans for personnel and how they are allocated. So get them to review the plan and evaluate it. It's a good plan, it's an unrealistic plan, or something along those lines. So activate them by getting them to evaluate the plan. Then study after they've done that, focus on Future Perfect and Future Perfect Progressive, and give them an opportunity to use it, and activate them again after they're explicitly aware of the form. And get them to make any staff reassignments that they think are a good idea based on workload and duration. So they shift it. By the third week, she will have been conducting interviews for 11 straight days. So future points in time anchor by the third week, and then something continuing after. She will have been conducting interviews duration for 11 straight days. So she should be changed to another task before the third week, something like that. So this is a clear context for this. Just two more classroom ideas. I hope you're finding these useful. Another context, so adaptable, is story predictions. This is one, again, Jimena has used, I believe. Predicting the end of the story. This also is in the ESA, Engage, Study, Activate format. The writer's room. So the engage stage is to present a story, but not the whole thing. In this case, very specifically, the story On the Sidewalk Bleeding by Evan Hunter, and get students to read up to a certain point until the line, the jacket had only one meaning now, and that was a very simple meaning. Boom. Okay, so they're engaged. They're going to want to deal with what's next. So then the activate stage, get them to work together and predict the ending of the story. Get them to decide what will have happened by the end of the story. And they can focus on any aspect of it. For example, by the end of the story, right, there's the future anchor point. Laura will have realized that Andy is taking too long. So they activate, and then the study point, review the structure and the use of the future perfect. And then you can engage them again by getting them to see what the writer did compared to what they've done. Of course, they're going to be highly curious. And this is so adaptable. You could use any story, and it doesn't have to be written. It could be a listening. It could be a video. It's so adaptable. So this predictive thing, it's very motivating, very motivating. And one more, for good measure, one more classroom idea for these, and that is in-class predictions. This is in the task-based learning format, this particular lesson. Ask for the pre-task, not predictions, but known facts about classmates currently. So ask students to write something they know about some classmates. The only material you need for this one is little bits of paper for them to write on. So you get their facts, mix them up, read them aloud, and ask students to guess who they're about. So this is also a little bit of get to know, and so on. Then the main task, get them now to write predictions about their classmates' future in a similar fashion. But that future anchor point that's necessary by 2017, by the time we graduate, by the end of the semester, before the year is over. So they get those, and then they have to put their predictions in that context. And then again, you can collect them, read them out, ask them to guess who they're about. Very motivating, a lot of fun. Of course, there are points where you have to use judgment, but generally this is quite a good one. Then you can go to the language focus, pointing out the formats, and then get them to practice again by making more predictions, this time explicitly aware of the grammar format to use. So now with about 10 minutes left, the formal presentation part is over. I'll just give to you some links to a format. Some links to some resources that we referred to in the presentation. But nothing too technical there. I think basically all of those, if you Google them, they come up within the first 5, so there's not anything too particular there. That is the formal presentation. So I leave it open for questions in the chat box.
Okay, that is an awesome presentation, Margaret. So now the chat box is open for your questions. And I actually have one question come in. Margaret,
yes.
Is there a way to get a copy of your presentation?
Yeah, I wasn't clear whether Realize would be making them available or if it needs to be done one by one. But yeah, we're happy to share the presentation. If you send me an email, if it's not available on this format, just send mhurley@youcanteachgrammar.com, and I'll get the message.
Awesome.
I'll be
And
happy
we
to share them.
also have a link here for the thread, for the group thread for this session. So if you want to continue the discussion there, you can use this thread, and maybe Margaret can respond there as well in terms of asking for the copy of the presentation. So any questions?
No, I sprayed with a fire hose so hard. Oh, Sandy, you just made my day.
Looking over at the chat box and taking over the questions.
Great, thank you. Thank you very much.
And what I remember particularly is what you said, to fight the panic, know the basics, right? It's really important. I guess it doesn't only relate to grammar, but also in life in general, I guess.
Yes, I agree. Yeah, it will. 9 times out of 10, it'll get you out of trouble. Know the basics. Yeah, I suppose. That's what being like doing Boy Scout and all of that is about. Just knowing how to do the basic stuff. Yeah. How to start a fire, how to figure out a verb tense. The basics will take you pretty far.
And have a grammar Bible nearby.
Yeah. Yeah, I happen to know of one.
Yes, and you provided a lot of examples, right? So this is useful for us ESL practitioners.
Great. Oh, thank you. So many nice comments. Thanks. Yeah. Thank you, Maureen. Yes. Great.
Yes, and I guess even for us, we still need to review grammar, and there are some stuff that we forget.
Mm.
So we need to brush up our knowledge about it.
Yeah. I saw a question, can you recommend a grammar Bible? Well, self-interest. Jimena and Claudia and I have written one that is specifically for, that first pass for people learning to become teachers. It's very much designed for that. So it comes with teaching ideas. That's the one we wrote, You Can Teach Grammar. So of course I would recommend that. Other ones, especially at the beginning of the presentation, we had, I love my grammar geeks, at the beginning saying there is no future tense. And so getting more into that kind of depth, I would recommend the Cambridge, Grammar of English, is excellent. That would probably be the top of my list, but they, the book is available. If you go to the website, youcanteachgrammar.com, there's a link to a buying option. It's also on Amazon. Swan is very practical. I'd agree. I have Swan.
Oh, lots of stuff there.
Yeah, I have Cambridge Grammar of English. Oh, this is backwards. Practical English Usage, that's Swan. And I would also say one that's very deep, but the grammar book is also a go-to one. I've used that. That's for the real grammar geek, deep stuff. If you're just starting out in the training, this is ours. So those are the ones I'd recommend. The Teacher's Grammar of English, yes, yep. And it has to be something that talks to you. In the same way, we have to make sense to our students. The resources we use have to make sense to us. Flipping through, dog-eared copies, those are the best. Okay. If there are no further questions, I think we can call it a wrap.